Well, I've just got no comment to make.
Are you still trying
I'm spending time focusing on it. Certainly, we have a view of Mr. McCready and whether he has legitimacy in what he's trying to do, but my lawyers are dealing with that. Well, I was a reluctant participant. No. Oh, I saw it, but I didn't vet it. No. Look, I have a standard policy. In the end, young people get engaged in social media. They have Instagrams and they have Facebook, and yep, some people will make the case that I should be the censor, but on the other side of the coin, while I'm also prime minister, I'm also a father, and most fathers let their kids have social media pages. So I've wanted my kids to grow up, naturally as much as they possibly can, to run their own lives. They've got to take the good and the bad that comes with that, and there'll be plenty of bad that comes along, and there'll be some good as well. And that's just the way it is. But if I try and stop that, then, well, I just don't think I'm doing them justice in the responsibility I have as their father. Well, the question is whether they'd listen to me, and I think that's highly debatable about whether they would. They might. I'm their loving father, so that helps.
Just coming back to the Reserve Bank on Thursday, if they do cut by points,
Yeah.
that will probably be interpreted as a sign that demand in the economy is wavering or falling. You mentioned the supply side. Do you have any concerns in a broad sense about how the demand side of the economy has been performing this year?
It still looks pretty strong. I mean, I think you saw the services number out today was strong. PMI for manufacturing was strong last week. Interesting enough, Bill said in China, the view that they had was consumer demand still very strong. So in certain areas, like for instance, infrastructure investment and financial investment, he saw quite a marked downturn there. But for instance, I think he went to one of the Chongqing, I think it was, but one of the the provinces, and he was saying basically, for instance, the demand for kiwi fruit was rising, exponentially. So China fundamentally is becoming a wealthier country, more middle income consumers, and they've got a lot more product to buy. And that's part of the reason why you're actually seeing sort of interesting different responses around commodities. So for instance, in some areas where they've either got ahead of themselves or there's been too much of a build-up, dairy being an example, you've seen a big reduction in prices, but in others, for instance, you've seen quite a big increase. And for instance, tourism demand out of China is growing really rapidly, and they've been very strong, and they're here for longer, spending a hell of a lot more. So just generally, we still see quite strong demand in the economy.
What did Mr. English pick up about the future of dairy exports?
Generally speaking, he's positive. I mean, I think he thinks that they may be lower for a little bit longer. There's no question that all the factors that we know that have driven the downturn in dairy are, I think they are accurate. There has been, less product going into Russia, if any. That's meant the Europeans are selling their product somewhere else. There's been quite a big build-up in inventory. I think when prices dropped, the Chinese came in and bought quite a bit and got a little ahead of themselves there. You've had very good growing conditions in China. So, for instance, they normally get foot and mouth. You haven't actually had that in any great form in the last 12 months. So just generally, there's been quite a lot of supply there. But it's a temporary issue. I mean, over time, there's no question the demand for dairy in the long term is likely to be very strong out of Asia.
How long is a bit long?
I don't know, but a little bit longer. Yep.
If that register did prove that foreign buying was required, Labor claimed it was like
Well, they said 40%, didn't they?
yeah, like 30% offshore. Would you do something if it came back that it was 30% offshore?
Well, you're asking me a sort of hypothetical question, and I mean, is the question, it depends on how you pose the question. If you're asking me if 30% of all sales of residential property in New Zealand was to foreigners, well, I think that's much bigger than I expected to be a problem. I'd say yes, because around New Zealand, I'd be amazed if that was the case. Even in Auckland, I'd be absolutely staggered if that was the case. But let's wait and see when we have the data.
At what level would it start worrying?
Well, again, you're asking a rather hypothetical question. I mean, what I'd rather do is gather the data, have a look at that data, and then consider whether we need to take next steps and what those next steps would look like if we decided to move. But all I can say is that the only, there are a number of countries around the world have taken some steps, and they all have different ways of administering their housing markets, from withholding taxes to stamp duties, in some cases to bans. But in major international cities and growing economies, none of them appear to me to have been terribly successful. So, if we were to act, we'd have to at least be comfortable, I think, that what we were trying to achieve. Would we be trying to slow down the market or just raise a bit of revenue? I don't know. We'd have to look at that. So, look, let's wait and see. No, I mean, we haven't discussed a figure. I mean, I think our general view is that you've had strong migration into New Zealand. You've got, a market which is, obviously encouraging some people to try and invest. You've got a pretty big Asian community and generally a multicultural community in Auckland. And so it's natural, that those numbers might be bigger, and for a variety of different reasons. In my view, I think you'll find, if you're asking me specifically about the issue that Labor raised last week, I don't think for one moment that they even believe the number is anything like what they said. I think that they are showing how desperate they are really to try and peddle those numbers. And yep, some of the buyers on that register will be non-resident New Zealanders who live in mainland China, but quite frankly, I think most of them will either be residents or basically be citizens.
But if it is as high as they say, that would be enough to trigger further restrictions on or trigger.
Well, if you're asking me whether 30 to 40% of all of New Zealand house sales were going to foreigners, yeah, I think that would interest me.
What if it was 15 to 20%?
Well, let's just wait and see and have a look what the data looks like. But, some of you guys have gone out there and followed some of the names on the list. I mean, look, as I said this morning on the radio, my next door neighbour's Mark Ching. I look more Chinese than he does, but according to Labor, he's a problem. My son is Max Tim Key, and he's born in Singapore. If you just saw that name on a piece of paper and I wasn't Prime Minister, you'd assume he's Asian. The video probably demonstrates he's not.
Have you received any kind of interim signals about what the likely decision will be about cheap?
No, I know that there have been discussions between the Minister of Finance's office and the company, indicating that the government wasn't prepared to put any more resources in as we did in the past. I know Meridian are dealing with the issue, but we'll have to see how it plays out. Hopefully, they'll stay. It's a good product in New Zealand. They're a significant employer. I actually stand by the decision we made some time ago to put some money in there because I think it was a very vulnerable time, and they have a big impact on the Southland economy. But the government's not interested in putting another cash injection in.
And is that because you see them as being less vulnerable now than they were before?
Yeah, the circumstances and time is a bit different, I think. I mean, we accepted the view that there were a lot of different factors happening at that time, and the economy was weaker and the implications were weaker. I think when we put that in, it was always put in as a temporary point of view, and we said to them at the time, you need to make a call about whether you're staying or going long term. It has to stand on its own 2 feet.
Say that you won't put any more cash, have they discussed any other kind of concessions or?
No, I don't think so. Not directly with the government. They may be having discussions with Meridian, but not with us.
Last year, I think you said that 65 was around about fair value for the keys. Where do you think it's going?
If I answer that question, I might break my record, which has been quite good at predicting. Look, I don't know. I think in the end, there's been a long-standing view from the government and the Reserve Bank that the exchange rate was overvalued, and I think it's the recent adjustments have reflected that view.
Still overvalued?
Don't know. It depends on what happens next. Well, they made, if you're talking about the very most recent changes they've made, they've announced those changes, and those changes were to reflect the fact that the very policy they implemented did not work. And, Joe Hockey actually had to force a guy to sell a property, as I understand it, in Sydney because actually it hadn't worked. And Sydney house prices, had been going up faster than Auckland property prices, as I think Melbourne were comparable to Auckland. So it hasn't stopped people buying. Well, someone would have to demonstrate to me that it would. And you also have to demonstrate that you want that. Because, what happens if it's a very complicated area, but what happens if somebody goes along and buys a high country station that's got an existing house on it, but wants to build a new house? Are they then unable to do that? Don't know. No, but we've responded, and in our view, Labor's claims are unfounded. Well, that was the advice. I mean, look, my own view of the thing is that there's 2.5 million people in the system. If it has any impact, it'll be on the under 18s, because there will be some people that have a baby, and under the previous scheme would have signed the baby up. The baby isn't going to be making savings because they're by definition a baby, but they'll get the $1,000 under the old scheme and would have done that until they actually enter the workforce. But actually, in terms of the point at which they go into the workforce, which is what KiwiSaver is all about, people establishing savings during their working life, I don't think will make a blind bit of difference, because it's a very sophisticated system now. Companies are very organised in terms of joining, and you just can't rule out the government's not going to move to auto enrolment. And on that basis, everyone will be in except people that are excluded for some reasonable reason. So the advice that I've had from Treasury and IRD, well, I think it's from Treasury or anyone in the cabinet paper, was that it would have, if it had any impact, it would be absolutely minimal, but if any at all. So I stand by my views. Okay.